Hello, my name is LoG, and welcome to part 5 of this brother-to-brother solo tutorial. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to this final part. All right, let's wrap up the solo with the last progression. First, let's recap where we came from. It was that ascending minor chord section: C minor, D minor, E flat minor, F minor, and then G major 7. And this is kind of where we're starting off. So the next chord after this, first chord of this next section, is G sharp minor 7 flat 5. Sounds like this. So that's just G sharp, D, F sharp, B. So 1, flat 5, flat 7, flat 3. And then we have C sharp super sus. So 1, flat 7, 2, and 4. You can also think about it as B with C sharp in the bass. That's also possible. And then we have a C sharp dominant with a flat 2. So all we're going to do is take both of these notes. The 4 moves down to the 3. The 2 moves down to the flat 2 or flat 9, whichever one you want to say. That's our chord. And then we eventually resolve to the F sharp major 7. So I'm going to bet that you already know what's happening here. It's pretty much the same thing as we've been talking about this entire lesson, and that is simple target chord with some setup chords, and those setup chords happen to be either the 5 of the target chord or the 2/5 of the target chord. The exact same thing as this entire solo. So what's our target chord? It is simply F sharp major 7, the final chord of this whole thing. And then the 2/5 is the G sharp minor 7 flat 5. And then the C sharp variation with the dominants, the suspended one first, and then the dominant with a flat 2, flat 9, and then the target chord, right? Again, just simply 2s and 5s of target chords, and we're good to go for pretty much this whole solo. Now, the interesting thing about this part, and it's kind of a similar thing that we saw earlier. If you remember, back in the very beginning of this solo, we had a progression that kind of looked like this. Here's our B minor, our target chord, and then for the 2/5 of that, we were playing like a C sharp super sus. And then we were playing that F sharp dominant with some added tones, sharp 5s, flat 2s, etc., and then resolving to the B minor. Now, if you remember, usually when you have a 2/5 of a minor chord, let's say B minor, the 2 is usually minor 7 flat 5. But they were playing something like this, like a super sus sound, which is not something you would normally do moving to a minor chord. Obviously, you can do it whenever you want. It sounds cool. But usually the 2 chord is minor 7 flat 5, right? Well, guess what was happening up here? The exact opposite thing. We have F sharp major 7, right? What are they playing, or what should the 2 chord usually be for this chord? It should usually be G sharp minor. If you're moving to a major chord, it's way more common to hear a minor 2 and then a 5 and then a 1. That's what that sounds like. That kind of sound, right? 2 G sharp minor and then C sharp dominant of some sort, F sharp major 7. That's the more common 2/5 of a major chord. But what are they doing? They're playing 2 as though the F sharp chord is minor, right? If I played F sharp minor, the more classic progression would be G sharp minor 7 flat 5, and then the C sharp dominant, and then F sharp minor. Usually when you have a target chord that is minor, the 2 is minor 7 flat 5. That is a very, very common sound. All you have to do is go listen to Autumn Leaves, and you're going to hear that exact thing. The 2 chords, whenever you're moving to a minor, very, very often are in that tune all the time, minor 7 flat 5, not normal minor. So what they're really doing here is they're just kind of flipping things, right? If the target chord is major, they're playing the 2 as though it's minor. If the target chord is minor, they're playing the 2 as though it's major, right? They're just kind of flipping some things around, adding some variation. And honestly, those chords, when they do that, are probably the most colorful chords of this whole solo. So again, you can do whatever you want. You can experiment, use variations as much as you want, as long as the rest of the band is on the same page. You can really make this stuff work really well. And then, of course, leading to the 5 chord, that C sharp dominant. This is a very classic, the super sus, right? Very classic type of dominant sound that you would use moving to a major 1, right? And you resolve like that. It's very smooth. All the notes are in the same key. Good to go. The only difference here is they're doing this sort of thing. We have the suspended, move the 4 back to the normal 3. That's very typical. Suspended, moving to what is essentially a normal dominant chord, and then resolving to the 1, major 7. A more simple version would be like this. Right, that's just like straight up major and suspended. But what they're doing is adding one extra little color note, and that will be this one. Instead of just the 4 moving back to the 3 like this, they have the 2 moving back to the flat 2, which does this. So both of these notes move back like that. Now, why would they do that? This chord is pretty nasty just outright. If I just played a bunch of... It's a pretty disgusting chord when you hear it, but they're doing it because they're creating a little kind of counter melody going on inside the changes. So if you listen to this one, listen to the G string of these chords. Here's the next chord with the flat 2, and then here's the F sharp major 7. Hear that chromatic move? I'll sing it actually. Right? So by itself, yeah, it's nasty, but in the sequence, it's very satisfying because you hear that little chromatic move. Very satisfying. Another thing that's also going on is another counter melody happening in the track, which sounds like this. Kind of a classic little melody for this change. And guess what note is in that melody? That's the flat 2 we're talking about, right? That's that kind of nasty note. It's in the progression, but it's also in the melody. So if I sing that little counter melody that's happening underneath, it sounds like this. So, ba-da-da-da, there's the note, ba-da-da-da, like that. Ba-da-da-da-da. So because that note is happening in the change as well as that little counter melody, it's very strong and very potent when you hear the resolution out of it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me play it one more time. So we've got the 2 chord, the G sharp minor 7 flat 5, then the C sharp super sus, then the dominant with the flat 2, and then finally the major 7. One other thing I want to talk about here is how we're getting to this this 2 chord, this minor 7 flat 5, because we're actually pretty much doing a key change right here, right? We just ended with G sharp major 7, and then this next section is emphasizing F sharp major 7. Those are totally different keys, right? How are we seamlessly getting into those? Because it does sound pretty smooth. Well, this is how it's doing it. Here's the G sharp major 7, right? What's the next chord that happens after this? It's that 2 chord, G sharp minor 7 flat 5, this one. What's the difference between these 2 chords, right? Check it out. G sharp major 7, G, D, F sharp, B. And then the G sharp minor 7 flat 5 sounds like this. G sharp, D, F sharp, B. Guess what? Both chords have D, F sharp, and B. 3 of the 4 notes are identical. The only difference is the G major 7 has a G in it, and the G sharp minor 7 flat 5 has a G sharp. It's literally moving the root up 1 fret. That's the change. That's why it's so smooth when you hear that key change, because you're really only moving 1 note between those 2 chords, so it sounds very smooth. It's kind of a clever little like key change trick that you can do. Look for a chord that's got a bunch of the same notes in it, so when you do make that switch, it's a lot smoother. You're kind of like pivoting off of that note as opposed to just like jumping drastically to a different key, kind of like it did earlier in the progression. If you remember that one section where it did this, and then it went bam, like that's a really drastic key change right there. This one that's going on is a lot smoother because a lot of the notes are happening within both of those keys or both of those chords. So yeah, another thing I did want to say in regards to this, in the original video that I have for this solo, I actually did not play, when I was doing this change, I actually didn't play this voicing. I was just playing this voicing, but as I listen back, I realized that that's a pretty important sound, so I want to make sure we talk about it. So in the original video, that's not happening, but in what we're about to hear, it is happening, so apologize for that. So now that we've got all of that stuff down, let me play this little tiny chord progression over the solo so you can hear what it sounds like in context. Turn on my click. Here we go. Coming from the G major 7. As you can see, this solo is pretty much the same idea used over and over again. The concept of a target chord being set up by its 5 or its 2 and 5. What do those setup chords do? They simply make your ears want to hear that final target chord. Sometimes the target chords are major, sometimes they're minor. Sometimes the setup chords are suspended, sometimes they're dominant with flat 2s or flat 5s or whatever, but the concept is pretty much there. Yes, we have some key changes that are drastic and variations with the chord, but that doesn't change the core idea that's happening throughout. Imagine taking a look at all of the chords on this song or through this solo on a piece of paper or like a chart. It would look ridiculous because we have tons of different roots. We have B, C sharp, F sharp, D, A, G. We have an F natural. We have a E flat minor. We have all these different sounds, not to mention the chord types: minor 7 flat 5, suspended, dominant 7 with sharp 5, major 7, major 9, all of these things. It can look crazy, and if you're not used to it, it can be super intimidating. But remember, take a step back from all of that stuff and think about, what is this chord doing in the music right now? What is this dominant chord doing? Oh, it's just simply a 5 chord of the next chord. Or what's this minor 7 flat 5 chord doing? Oh, it's just the 2 of the next chord, or the 2-5 of the next chord. It can make things that seem relatively complex very, very simple. This is often the problem with jazz in general, and that's why people tend to kind of be afraid of this style. Because if you look at a chart, like a jazz chart, and that's all you do, it can look like just a bunch of bullshit, a bunch of crazy chord names and wild, root movements, key changes all over the place. But again, if you take a step back and look at what is actually happening, most of the time it's remarkably simple. You can take tunes that sound very complex and break them down to something really simple, much like this solo, which is pretty much, again, just a target chord being set up by its 2 and 5 in a variety of different ways. So with that in mind, let's go over the final part of this solo. Okay, let me play this solo slowly first, and then we'll go over what's happening. Sounds like this. So it's following the changes pretty much exactly like the rest of the solo has, except it's heavily featuring the concept that I call pretend chords, which is when a chord is happening, but you're actually pretending it's something else for an effect. So let's go over this first little section, and then we'll talk about that. First section looks like this. Really simple, just F sharp, B, D, bend up to E, bring it back to D, play the C sharp twice, just like that. And again, you can play this a variety of ways. I'm playing it like this, because I like the tone, F sharp, B, D, but you can play like that, bunch of different ways to do it. But let's take a look at the first 3 notes. This is going to be our first pretend chord. So what do we have here? F sharp, B, D. Okay, if we play all 3 of those notes together, what do we have? We have a literal B minor chord, right? What chord is happening at this moment, though? It is the G sharp minor 7 flat 5. Right? Well, guess what? If we take a look at a G sharp minor 7 flat 5 and don't play the G sharp for a second, what do we have? A literal B minor chord, right? There is a B minor chord that lives inside of G sharp minor 7 flat 5. And in fact, what is G sharp of B? So if this is our B, our root, this would be 1, 7, flat 7, and that would be 6. G sharp is the 6. So what does that mean? G sharp minor 7 flat 5 is the same thing as B minor with a 6, also known as B minor 6. Right, so this chord, this is a B minor 6 chord, 1, 5, 6, flat 3, is the same thing, literally, note-wise, as G sharp minor 7 flat, minor 7 flat 5. The only difference is, of course, the order of the notes and the G sharp being in the bass. This is a really common and really easy pretend chord to play. It is simply this. If I just play a minor 7 flat 5 anywhere I want, how about right here? Right, don't care what chord this is. If that's the chord, and you would rather play minor over this, maybe if you're not super comfortable with minor 7 flat 5 ideas, if you'd rather play minor because you're more comfortable with it, all you have to do is this. Here's the root of the actual minor 7 flat 5 chord, but you're going to pretend that it's up 3 frets minor. That will always work, because this note minor 6 is the same thing as this note's minor 7 flat 5. That is literally what's happening up here. Here's the G sharp minor 7 flat 5, up 3 frets. What note is that? B. So B minor is the same thing as G sharp minor 7 flat 5, right? That is why when he plays a lick that sounds like that, it's pretty much just B minor, right? That's why it works so well over this chord, because both of those sounds are identical. If this chord is happening, you can pretend that it's up 3 frets, minor, and you can get away with a ton of different ideas, any kind of like, even some of your kind of like classic, almost like blues minor licks will work perfectly over this sound, right? It's a really great way to kind of reuse some ideas, minor ideas that you're already playing in a context that's very different. All right, nice. So then the next pretend chord that happens is around here. So we're playing pretty simple during the C sharp chord. So that little part just sounds like this. Again, here's that little B minor. we're pretty much holding that note during this chord. And then for the last C sharp dominant with the flat 2, that's this. So that's like B, C sharp, F sharp, and then G sharp, which is a little kind of B minor-ish sound that we're going to talk about here in a second. And then here's the big one. This is the perfect example of pretend chords that we'll talk about. So this is the passage first. I'll play it first. I'll show you what the notes are, and then we'll talk about it. It looks like this. Here we go, right here. So I'll do that a little more slowly one more time. Looks like this. 2 notes right there. Dip down here. Next 2. Next 2. Next 2. You don't have to play it like this. You can also play it like this if you want. Play that note right there, the C sharp. I'm just playing it right here because it's more comfortable. Then we dip down to this note, jump up here, dip down to this note, the final note of that solo. So let me play that one more time, a little slower. I'll zoom in as well so you can see what's happening. Excuse me. I've got to make sure I pick the note. That part, right? If we look at all the notes, let's just generally look at what's happening. What does this look like? Doesn't that feel like maybe that is the root and we're kind of playing minor? Isn't that what that feels like? Well, guess what? This is probably one of the most common pretend chords that you could ever play. What is happening? The chord sound, or the sound that's in our hands during the lead, is really this. It's like B flat minor, or A sharp minor, however you want to think about it. What is the actual chord happening at this moment? It is F sharp, major 7. So we are playing a minor idea over a major 7 chord, right? If you would like more information on this topic, I have a full lesson on this exact pretend chord because it's ridiculously common. You can check it out the link above or below in the description at any time. What we are doing is this. If you have a major 7 chord anywhere, what you do, move up 2 whole steps, or to that note's third, right? So if this is F sharp, move up 2 whole steps, and play minor based on that note, right? It will always work. And the cool thing about this sound, when we play, like if I play minor arpeggio, or if I play minor pentatonic, if I play those sounds, we're getting all of the interesting notes of F sharp minor 7, or excuse me, F sharp major 7, except we don't have the root, right? This whole passage never plays F sharp, the root of this chord. Watch this. Where's F sharp? Right there. We're never playing that when we play minor or minor pentatonic right here. All we're getting are the other notes, right? We're getting like the 3rd, the 5th, the 2, the 7, the 6, and we're not playing the root, right? Which is a very safe note. If you recall in the previous lesson, I talked about how playing the root of a major 7 in your lead might be a little too strong because it clashes with the 7. Well, guess what? If you don't want to do that, if you want to avoid that clash, look at the chord that you're playing. Let me just play a random major chord. How about here? Go up 2 whole steps. Whatever note that is, start playing minor right there on top of the major 7 chord that's actually happening. What are we doing? This is the chord that's... let me go back to the song. This is the chord that's happening. We're pretending it's this in our lead. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what these notes are in relation to this chord, right? If this is our root, even though it's not really, it's really this, right? That's really our root, but we're pretending it's this. What would these notes be? It would be this. 5 of this, flat 7, flat 3, 5, 1, 4, flat 7, 1, flat 3, 5, 1. All of that is literal pentatonic scale. Just notes that are straight up in the standard pentatonic scale of whatever note this is, B flat or A sharp in this case. Now at the very end, there's a little cheeky F sharp that's thrown in there to imply what the actual chord is, and that looks like this. There it is. It's kind of sneaking in the F sharp, which is the root of this actual chord. And then it dips down here to play the final F on the bottom, which is the 5th of this chord, but the 7 of the actual chord that's happening at that moment, creating some really cool sounds. So yeah, this is a great example of that pretend chord sound where the chord is this, but we're pretending it's something that feels very different. And maybe, you know, we have a bunch of minor ideas that we've been practicing all week, and then you come across a major 7 chord and you're thinking, I can't play any of those minor ideas because this is a major 7 chord. Not true. As long as you use this concept and know where to play your minor ideas, it will always work really well, and you can use a ton of licks in a variety of different ways. So, and then of course, the very, very end of the solo is really just the theme again of the song, which is this. That's really simple, again. That's really it. So let me play this whole solo, and I'll zoom in so you can really see what it looks like. Or this, not necessarily this whole solo, this whole section, excuse me. So I want to show you how powerful these pretend chords can be when you use them over a progression like this. So of course, we can just straight up play the chords in our lead: G sharp minor 7 flat 5, C sharp suspended, C sharp dominant with flat 2, F sharp major 7. We can play those ideas, but instead of doing that, we can also look at pretend chords that work with all of these sounds and drastically simplify the progression so it doesn't feel like there's so much happening, right? Let me show you what I mean. G sharp minor 7 flat 5. We just figured out earlier that we can play B minor 6 over that because it's really the same sound. Minor 7 flat 5, go up 3 frets, start playing minor or minor pentatonic or minor with a 6. Let me play over that chord so you can see what it sounds like. That's literal B minor ideas that I'm playing right there. Then for the C sharp super sus, I can play B major. Why? Because there's a B major chord literally happening inside of the shape. So I can play like B major 7. Again, that's over that chord. And then over the next one, C sharp dominant with the flat 2, I can play B minor 7 flat 5. Why? Because that's happening in the chord right there. Or maybe, how about just B minor? That's kind of cool too. That's all over this chord. And then what about for the F sharp major 7? I can play the pretend chord that we talked about earlier, up 2 whole steps, minor, so B flat minor. That's all over this chord. So look at what I've done. I took the chord progression that is actually happening and simplified it to B minor, B major, B minor, back a fret, B flat minor. So much easier to conceptualize or think about because your roots are barely moving. For 3 of the 4 chords, it's literally B. And I'm just kind of flip-flopping between major and minor depending on what the chord is. And then for the final chord, I just move back a fret. So if I mess around a little bit over these changes, just by thinking about these sounds, notice the kind of sounds that I get. Here's the B minor. Major, B minor, B flat minor. That's so much easier to think about because it's just a bunch of B's, B major, B minor, and then B flat, just back a fret minor, right? So easy to do that. Here's that last change. I can literally go like this. Back a fret. Seamlessly transition in between those 2 chords. Such a valuable concept. I've talked about it before on this channel. I'm going to talk about it more down the road. And of course, a lot of other people talk about this stuff too. It's not like I came up with it, but it's such a great idea to have in your mind all of the time. Simplifying chord progressions, using licks in contexts that you wouldn't naturally do is super valuable. All right, that does it for this brother-to-brother solo tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Always make sure to analyze your chord progressions, know what various sounds you can play over any chord at any given time, practice some of the more colorful sounds like up a half step melodic minor, etc. Tons of great sounds that you can use in a variety of styles. If you would like more lessons on these topics, feel free to check out the description below, where I have a bunch of stuff that you can practice over, backing tracks, as well as full lessons for most of these topics. If you enjoy this type of instruction and material, or you would like to download the backing track that I've made for this lesson, consider becoming a patron at the link in the description. See you guys in the next one.